So let me see if I can put this into a concrete example. Many, many years ago, it's already been decades, I had the privilege of being in the periphery of a large, very, very large global organization that for many, many decades had autodidactically, just by the nature of business and there not being a clear mandate on how to do things, people knew that they had to do it some way. So what you had is you had a grassroots movement over here. In one country they were doing thing, in one industry, in one business unit they were doing this. I think the company in total had 15 different types of project management methodologies. Okay. And it was what I call the origin of any of the project management evolution, which is I like to call anarchic agility, doing it every which way. And I think a lot of people who hear way of working might think that's what it is. But let me take you to the crux of my experience there. This companies realized that a very large part of the success of their company was based on their ability to successfully deliver projects, because they delivered complex systems that you couldn't just put in a box and send. They had to be implemented. You had to engage the client. There had to be training. You had to install hardware and software and stuff like that. So project management became an essential part of their delivery of products. And as a service became a real source of revenue and profit for them. And I was thrilled because it had reached the C-suite level where they finally said, listen, we have 3,642 projects worldwide in 4 different categories. Back then, I think it was 6, A, B, C, D, E, F, something like that. This would be irresponsible from an executive perspective to have that many substantial projects in our project portfolios and us not to do some form of uniformity, common language, common process. Now, a lot of people, and when I originally read Way of Working, that was my first question that popped up reading the book many years ago, was are they saying that everything that we consultants have been preaching over the last decades, hey, we need a common language, we need a common process? Are you contradicting that? I know what you think, but I want to hear it from you, from the horse's mouth or from the 2 cowboys' mouth.
Okay, I'll tell. I like to teach in stories. One of the first real practitioners with DA was Jonathan Smart in the UK, and he at one point in his career was responsible for the worldwide agile transformation for Barclays. Here's a situation where they literally have thousands of teams and projects going on at the same time. And he's supposed to pick a methodology. Like, it's not going to be safe. It's not going to be Scrum, because everybody is doing different things in different contexts, different situations. And by the way, some are more agile than others.
Yeah, under different regulation regimes.
Yeah. So imagine in our world, we'll talk about life cycles in a bit, I'm sure. But we find typically the most advanced teams are the ones that are doing what we call continuous delivery, delivering stuff every day, many times a day. Now, they're advanced teams.
We'll deep dive on that a little bit later.
Yeah, but those are super advanced teams, and there's going to be lots of them at Barclays. So imagine, but John's got to play to the lowest denominator. So he's going to say, okay, our methodology is Scrum, and you're going to build stuff every 2 weeks. So stop delivering every day, because our new methodology is Scrum. Well, you would have people quitting, right? So John didn't have the political capital, and it didn't make any sense to have that mandate. So what he said was, we're going to use a DA framework. And I won't go into details because you want to do a dive later, but we have architects on every team, or representatives of architecture on every team.
Yeah.
So what John said is, you do Lean, you do Scrum, you do whatever, safe, whatever you think you need to do in your situation. But guess what? We're using the DA framework, and the DA framework says that there will be an architecture owner on every team making good technical decisions and accountable for those technical decisions, so that we have a level of governance and consistency across the organization. So that makes John, CIO, sleep better at night, knowing that there's that minimal governance in place, regardless of what approach that they're using. So
what you're saying is amazing, but it's easy because there's a paradoxical element that some people will hear what you're saying and they say, DA means no system. Let me take a step back. What you're not saying I mean, quite honestly, what you're saying to me sounds intelligent. I mean, it's just common sense to me. I find it amazing that people have to understand it. But let's get back to the core of my original question was, I've always been a great proponent of common language and common process, but I think common process is often misunderstood, like way of working might be misunderstood. Way of working might mean it doesn't make a difference what I'm doing. I can do whatever the hell I want, and I can use whatever vocabulary, and I can violate any kind of rules because there are no rules. That's not what it's saying. Just like me saying having a common process doesn't mean that you can't have diversity of methodologies to get something done. And yes. I think that might be a good summary of what Disciplined Agile in a very simple way addresses. I often like to say, Scott, you talked about religious war. There's a term I use a lot as well. It gets on my nerves. I like to say when people say, well, what's your preferred delivery methodology? And I say, whatever works. Yeah. Okay. Whatever works. I mean, if I'm going to work in a larger, if I'm in charge of a PMO, or if I were to be a portfolio manager, I'm still going to create a minimum denominator. We call it minimum viable or whatever. So that we're at least speaking the same language and there's some uniformity so that, when executives have to read, project summaries, they're not completely confused because it's totally different. And, one person is calling it this, the other person is calling it that. That's not what we're shooting for. But I often say, delivery methodologies are like ice cream, to say that Agile is not project management, although there's elements of Agile that are not project management. We can talk about that later as well. It's ice cream to me, and I love chocolate ice cream. I like vanilla ice cream. Some people prefer certain flavors, but I rarely eat one flavor all by itself, right? And I think that's kind of how, and maybe it's a weird analogy, but I like ice cream, so maybe that's why I threw that in there. It's kind of, I think, what you're going for with a discipline. Isn't it kind of like a core principle of the Disciplined Agile approach to say, listen, it's all ice cream. We can tailor what you're needing. So tailoring is one big foundational concept of what Disciplined Agile is all about, right?
Yeah, and that gets back to like the origin story, right? Like, so it came about from observing that every team was working in different ways. And so how do you deal with that? Because that's not what management wants to hear, right? They don't want to hear that. It's reality on the ground. You can choose to observe it. Most choose not to. And most choose to see it as chaos that they have to get under control by inflicting some onerous governance process. So what we did in DA was we insisted, you know what? Let's make sure you are going to be governed, but let's make sure it's not onerous. Let's make sure that it actually gets the job done. So we adopted a lot of great ideas from Rupp and simplified it, but adopted some great Rupp ideas and took a risk-based approach to governance as opposed to a documentation-based approach to governance and an artifact-based approach. Now, most governance people their knee-jerk reaction is going to be, well, we're always risk-based, and that's nonsense. I've been into so many organizations where they say, oh yeah, we do risk-based governance, and then you ask, well, how are you doing it? Well, we force them to fill out these templates. Okay, so you just told me it's artifact-based, but you're lying about the risk-based stuff. And yeah, the artifacts were created based on some sort of risk that happened, years ago. But it's like, no, let's step back from whatever it is you're doing. Let's talk about the risks that you are really interested in, and which we've embedded in DA, and say, so our approach is, we need to see you address these risks appropriately. How you do that is up to you, and here's some really good options. But as long as we see you addressing architectural risk, you're good to go. As long as we see you addressing financial risk, you're good to go, right? And the way you would do that in a regulatory environment is very different than in a non-regulatory environment. Fair enough, right? And what happens in a lot of organizations, they desperately, I've worked in pharmaceutical organizations, right? And they'll say, well, we have to be FDA compliant.
Yeah.
And my answer is, no, you don't. You don't. Some of your projects need to be FDA compliant because there's a risk you might
or certain someone. Elements of your projects have to be FDA required, but not
exactly. Does your website need to be FDA compliant? Well, no. Well, so do we need to inflict FDA compliancy on the website development team? Well, yes, of course we do, because we've all got to follow the same process.